That I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I'd give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times?
Okay, here we are. And we have no captions. Again. What? Yeah. Okay. Really gotta find some time to get this replaced. Really gotta find some time to get it replaced. Okay. No. There we go. That should do it. I think. I hope. I hope. Hello? There. Is that working? Okay. Okay, let's jump into it. We're going to finish up this chapter tonight. The Occult A History. We were right in the middle of a chapter. I'm going to finish it up and see where we're going from there. So, Cagliostro. Okay. So we were talking about Cagliostro. The philosopher Lavater, a friend of Geth, asked to meet him. Cagliostro replied, Quote, "If your science is greater than mine, you have no need of my acquaintance. If mine is the greater, I have no need of yours." End quote. Lavater persisted and later became the warmest of Cagliostro's defenders. That's where we left off. It is now that Cardinal de Rohan, Rohan, enters the story. He was a strange man, a prince of the family of Bourbon, tall, handsome, rich, enormously charming. In spite of his position in the church, he loved wine, hunting, and the opposite sex. The sorrow of his life was that the Queen, Marie Antoinette, disliked him. Her mother, Maria Theresa of Austria, had taken a strong dislike to him when he was ambassador to Austria, and his dreams of becoming the Richelieu, the Mazarin, behind Louis XVI, were receding further every day. He had another sorrow, even more curious. He was in love with the Queen. He had met her for the first time 10 years earlier, when she came through Strasbourg, of which Rohan was the bishop. A girl of 15 en route to join her husband. She was very beautiful, with ash blonde hair and a perfect complexion, and a slim figure that would later become plumper. When the cardinal bishop administered communion to the kneeling princess, he found himself envying the husband who would shortly claim her virginity. But oddly enough, this was not to be. In bed with his beautiful young wife, the future King of France became impotent. In his diary, he wrote nothing. What was worse, the situation soon became common knowledge all over Europe. Louise's doctors said that the trouble was physical, not psychological, and that it would be cured by a scalpel. But the king, he came to the throne in 1774, was afraid of pain and declined. So for the next 6 years he clambered onto his wife every night, and the result continued to be nothing. It must have struck the cardinal as a sinful waste, and deepened his morbid preoccupation with the lovely ash blonde. It was 10 years after the meeting that the Cardinal Bishop of Strasbourg heard about the miracle worker who was now living in the town. He sent a note to Cagliostro and was promptly rebuffed, in the same manner as Lavater. Cagliostro replied that if he was ill, he would cure him. If he wasn't, then he had no need of a doctor, nor the doctor of him. The cardinal, unoffended, declared that he had asthma and asked Cagliostro to attend him. The two immediately impressed one another. The cardinal told the Abbé Georgel that he saw in Cagliostro's face a, quote, "a dignity so impressive that he felt himself in the grip of an awesome religious experience," end quote. It was the Cardinal Prince who became the acolyte and disciple, and who was flattered when Cagliostro told him one day, quote, "Your soul is worthy of my own. You deserve to be the confidant of all my secrets," end quote. The Baroness de Oberkirk, like many others, reacted unfavorably to the idea of an adventurer gaining so much influence over Rohan, yet found him hypnotically fascinating. Baron de Gleichen has left an accurate portrait. Quote, and this is a long quote, "Cagliostro was small, but he had a very fine head, which could have served as a model for the face of an inspired poet. In fact, Cagliostro's bust gives him a strong resemblance to William Blake. It is true that his tone, his gestures, and his manners were those of a charlatan, boastful, pretentious, and arrogant, but it must be remembered that he was an Italian, a physician giving consultations, self-styled Masonic Grandmaster, and a professor of occult sciences. Otherwise, his ordinary conversation was agreeable and instructive, his actions noble and charitable, and his healing treatments never unsuccessful and sometimes admirable. He never took a penny from his patients." End quote. And Cagliostro was fabulously successful in Strasbourg, both as an occultist and a doctor. Sometimes it was simply warmth and confidence that produced their effect, as when he was successful in delivering a baby for a woman who had been given up by midwives. He decided the baby was still alive and soothed her and gave her confidence, admitting afterwards that Glycon that the result was due to luck rather than skill. He cured the Marquis de La Salle of a gangrened leg. When the cardinal's uncle, the Prince de Soubise, was dangerously ill, the cardinal took Cagliostro along to see him without disclosing the Grand Copt's identity. The prince had been given up by his regular doctors, but Cagliostro had him up and about within 3 days. It was this cure that improved his reputation with the aristocracy. His séances in Strasbourg were equally impressive, and he gave indubitable proofs of second sight and telepathy, reading the contents of a sealed envelope, predicting what people were doing in other places, and successfully avoiding traps set for him by the unbelieving. When a widow asked a question about her husband, the Colombe remained silent until the woman admitted the trick. He impressed the Baroness de Oberkirk by telling her one day that the Empress of Austria had just died. It took 3 more days for the news to reach Strasbourg. The Baroness, while fascinated by Cagliostro, was determined to resist him, continuing to believe that he wanted some favor of her, an introduction to the Grand Duchess of Russia? She could not have been aware that Cagliostro had left St. Petersburg under a cloud. She told Rohan that she was convinced Cagliostro wanted to fleece him of money. The cardinal replied by showing her a diamond and gold ring worth 20,000 francs, which he claimed that Cagliostro had made in front of his own eyes. This convinced her. There can be little doubt that Cagliostro had no intention of swindling anyone. He had plenty of money. No doubt the ring had been given him by some Freemason admirer, or by someone he had cured. What he wanted now was simply to consolidate his position, to become the friend of princes, to regenerate the human race. He had no need to be a swindler now. He had proved his powers, and even if the cardinal broke with him, he still had his Freemasons. His own Egyptian lodges all sent him small contributions. As to Lorenza, now a beautiful woman in her mid-20s, she was the toast of the town. The Inquisition biographer states that she gave herself to many of her admirers, in exchange for money, of course. A more reliable source states that while she was capable of flirting and keeping them happy with smiles, she remained faithful to her husband. This is undoubtedly true. They were living in the public eye, and a liaison would have ruined her. Besides, her husband had already forgiven her twice. His patience might not extend to a third time. It was a pity that Cagliostro did not remain in Strasbourg, where he might have lived out the remainder of his life in comfort. But the hatred of the doctors made him uncomfortable. Although he fortunately discovered in time a spy they had planted in his household, he went to Naples to nurse an old friend who was dangerously ill, then to Bordeaux and Lyon. Then he obeyed the cardinal's insistent demands and went to Paris. The eve of his downfall had arrived, and in another sense the eve of the French Revolution. The decade between 1770 and 1780 had not been a happy one for Rohan, for the Queen had become his enemy and blighted his career. When her husband became king, she had the cardinal, or bishop as he was in those days, dismissed from his job as ambassador to Austria. She also tried hard to prevent him from being made cardinal, Grand Almoner, Administrator General of the Sorbonne, and Abbot of St. Waast, W-A-A-S-T, I'm not sure, in Arras. And although she failed in each case, she managed to make her royal displeasure felt in 100 minor matters. The crueler she became, the more infatuated became her admirer. It might be supposed that sexual frustration was the underlying cause of her disapproval of the dashing cardinal, but she had ceased to be a virgin on July 20th, 1777, when the king had finally risen to the occasion. A week later, she was able to assure her mother that, quote, "the essay has been repeated," end quote. She later produced 2 sons and a daughter. The cardinal's eye for a pretty woman was his misfortune. In Strasbourg he had met a charming adventuress who called herself the Countess de la Motte Valois, Valois, sorry, who claimed to be a descendant of Henry II. She had married a handsome but impecunious army officer named Lamotte. In Paris she called on the cardinal, now Grand Almoner of France, to see if he could not do something to help restore her family's ancestral lands, or perhaps get her husband a commission in the king's regiment. The cardinal liked her. He liked her so much that her second visit lasted until the early hours of the morning. She was too grateful for the purse of gold he had given her to object when he began to unhook her dress. Oddly enough, the 50-year-old cardinal fell violently in love with this young girl in her mid-20s and wrote her a number of indiscreet letters. It was the cardinal who made sure she was introduced at court, and according to the Countess de la Motte, her misfortunes had soon made her a bosom friend of the Queen's. Rohan was delighted. It was the opportunity he had wanted for years. He begged his attractive mistress to use all her influence with Marie Antoinette, and he was overjoyed when the Countess assured him that the Queen was softening toward him. In fact, the Countess was hatching a plot to get rich. She believed mistakenly that the Cardinal was a very rich man. In fact, he was a spendthrift, and a fire at his mansion near Strasbourg had cost him a fortune. The scheme was simple. It was known that the Queen herself, a talented spender, coveted a diamond necklace that had been made by two jewelers named Boehmer and Bessange. But the price, 1,600,000 livres, Livres, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, was too much even for her. Jean de la Motte's plan was to was to persuade Rohan to purchase the necklace for the Queen. Then she would make off with it. The Cardinal was not expected to make the Queen a present of the necklace, only to buy it secretly for her, or rather to pledge his credit for it. It was all fatally easy. The Countess undertook to deliver letters from the Cardinal to the Queen, and she forged the Queen's replies. The Cardinal naturally expected some sign of the Queen's approval. The Countess and her husband hired a young courtesan, Nicole de Oliva, to impersonate the Queen at a secret meeting in the gardens of Versailles. The Cardinal was allowed to kiss her slipper, and seems to have had no suspicions. Now Cagliostro's only part in this absurd business was as Rohan's confidant. He had been in Lyons and Bordeaux during the period when the Cardinal was negotiating for the necklace. So he had the perfect alibi. He had even warned the Cardinal against Jean de la Motte at an early stage, but he does seem to have encouraged the Cardinal's hopes of advancement through the Queen, and the Inquisition biographer says he conjured up an image of the Queen in a bowl of water for the Cardinal's benefit. The most damaging thing that can be said of Cagliostro in this whole affair is that his occult gifts were clearly not working at all between 1784 and 1785, when the whole thing blew up. Did no star tell him that a tidal wave was about to burst over so many people? It came in July 1785, when the first payment of 400,000 francs, full due on the necklace, fell due on the necklace, and the cardinal received the request from the jewelers. He passed it on to the queen through the Countess de la Motte. The countess forged a letter from the queen saying she could not meet the payment. The cardinal was astounded and then alarmed when the jewelers pointed out that in that case he would have to meet it himself. The countess had expected this, of course, and she had expected him to pay up quietly. This happened to be impossible. The cardinal could only raise an immediate 30,000 francs. The jewelers declined to give him the 3 months' leeway he asked for, and applied direct to the queen, who thought they had gone mad. Boehmer saw the king, who naturally demanded an explanation from Rohan himself, and it was at this point that the queen interfered just once too often. She was so indignant that her name had been taken in vain that she demanded the instant arrest of Rohan. It would have been more sensible to hush the whole thing up. A public scandal could do no one any good. Instead, Rohan, Cagliostro, the countess, and her lover, Villette, who had taken part in forgeries, were all arrested. The countess's husband was in London, where he had been disposing of the jewels. The result of Marie Antoinette's decision was the eventual destruction of practically everyone involved in the case. Rohan and Cagliostro were acquitted, but Rohan was ruined, and Cagliostro had become a laughingstock. The countess was ordered to be whipped naked in public and branded. Nicole de Oliva and Villette were acquitted, the latter banished. Marie Antoinette had been a popular queen before the case. Now, although her innocence was established, she was booed and hissed by the Paris mob whenever she went out in her coach. Jean de la Motte, an endlessly fluent liar, and managed to convey the impression that she was the victim of the queen and cardinal, who had been having a love affair. When whipped and branded, she struggled like a fury and bit through the leather of the executioner's tunic, drawing blood. The crowd sympathized with her. She escaped to London, but the line of her destiny was also plunging steeply. She wrote a story of my life, in which she lied as brilliantly as ever, declaring herself the victim of Cagliostro, Rohan, and the queen. She quarreled with her husband, who got tired of her love affairs. She quarreled with her lover, who got tired of her tantrums. The money for the necklace seems to have vanished very quickly. She had lived with immense extravagance in the 6 months before she was found out, and she was perpetually hounded for debt. Attempting to escape her creditors, she climbed out of a window and fell 3 floors to the pavement, fracturing her hip, splintering her arm, and losing an eye. She lingered on for several weeks, long enough to express grim satisfaction at the news of the king's arrest at Verona, and died before her 35th birthday. By that time, Cagliostro had been in the Inquisition's prison for 2 years, which also caused her some satisfaction. Even the girl Nicole de Oliva, who had impersonated the queen, died at the age of 28. The cardinal died fairly comfortably in Baden in 1803. It was Cagliostro, the innocent bystander, who came off worst of all. Before his arrest, he was rich, famous, and widely respected. Incarceration in the Bastille completely unnerved him. Besides, he was frantic with anxiety for his wife, who was arrested with him. After 7 months, she was released and received universal sympathy. Cagliostro stayed in jail for nearly a year. He took it very badly, and he made a ridiculous impression at his trial. Quote, swaggering, dashing in a gold-embroidered green taffeta coat, end quote. His hair hanging greasy ringlets to his shoulders. When the judge asked him who he was, he replied in the voice of a ham actor, quote, I am a noble voyager, nature's unfortunate child, end quote, which drew a burst of laughter. He had prepared a life story which seems intended as a deliberate mockery. In it he claimed to be of noble birth, although he had no idea of his parentage, and that he was brought up under the name of Asherat in Arabia, and had apparent apartments in the palace of the Mufti Salah Haim, head of the Mohammedan religion. Travels in Asia and Africa follow. He meets his master, Althotas, who dies in Malta, pressing his hand, and so on. Cagliostro seems to have totally lost his judgment. It was time to be quiet, dignified, restrained, if he had wanted to emerge from this with a shred of reputation. Instead, he played the mountebank. After the trial, he went to London, banished by the king. He tried to sue the governor of the Bastille for the return of large sums of money and other items stolen when he was arrested, but lost the case. He was still sufficiently rich to send Nicole de Oliva, whose beauty had made a great impression at the trial, 700 crowns. In London, he addressed a letter to the French people, which immediately achieved large sales in Paris. It was another nail in the coffin of the old order. The letter also has a prophetic ring. In view of future events, he declares that he will not return to Paris until the Bastille is pulled down and made into a public promenade, and prophesies that the French will have a prince who will abolish lettres de cachet, arbitrary orders of imprisonment or banishment, and will convoke the States General Parliament. Quote, he will not be satisfied with being the first of his ministers. He will aim at being the first of Frenchmen. End quote. But to state that Cagliostro prophesied the revolution and Napoleon is going a little too far. He did not say the Bastille would be made a public promenade, only that he would not return until it was. However, it is arguable that his letter did much to bring about that result not long after. It was the king himself who convoked Parliament, even if the last sentence quoted fits Napoleon. London was no refuge. The British Freemasons were not interested in the Egyptian rites, while the Courrier de l'Europe published an exposé of Cagliostro that is quite as vindictive as the Inquisition biographer's account, revealing his true identity as Giuseppe Balsamo. Cagliostro and Lorenzo moved to Basel, then Turin, where the police instantly ordered them to move on. They tried to settle in a small village in the Austrian Tyrol, Roveredo, but were again ordered to move on. In Trent, in Austria, he found another alchemist cardinal willing to become his patron, but the emperor ordered him to leave Austrian soil. His wife had lost her beauty, although only in her early 30s, and as their fortune dwindled, was forced to sell her diamonds. Cagliostro finally made his supreme mistake and returned to Rome, attempting to propagate Freemasonry under the nose of the Pope. In 1789 he was arrested and never again gained his freedom. The Vatican hinted at vast plots by French revolutionaries to overthrow the church, and doubled the guard around the Castel San Angelo. Cagliostro's trial was undoubtedly intended as a declaration of war on Freemasonry. The Freemasons replied to the Inquisition biography with a pamphlet that made a far greater impact and convinced the Pope that he was wise to have rid himself of the dangerous Freemason. Cagliostro was transferred to the Castel San Leo, where the cells were made of old dried-up cisterns or cut out of solid rock. Here he was almost literally buried alive in darkness. He died in 1795 at the age of 52. His wife died in the nunnery in 1794, still under 40. When French soldiers took the San Leo prison in 1797, they searched for Cagliostro, intending to treat him as a revolutionary hero, but he was dead. This remarkable man was indeed the last of the magicians, and nearly 2 centuries after his death he remains as misunderstood as during his lifetime. In spite of the broad streak of charlatanism in him, he was undoubtedly a genuine magician. He regarded himself as a man with a mission, and he pursued it single-mindedly. He loved giving good living, but he was also incredibly generous, perhaps the most basic sign of a fundamentally good man. As he himself pointed out at his trial, there is no reliable evidence that he ever harmed anyone during his extraordinary career, and there can be no doubt that he did much good. It is curious that his career, like that of so many others we have considered, Agrippa, Paracelsus, John Dee, Casanova, Mesmer, reached a certain apex and then went into a runaway decline. This seems to be a characteristic of all magicians. It can also be seen in Madame Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, and Rasputin. I have deliberately left one of the most remarkable predictions to the end because it involves the complex science of numerology. This was made at a Masonic gathering during his final period in Paris, at the home of the Orientalist, the Count de Gebelin. Cagliostro explained to the assembly that each letter in the alphabet has a numerical value, a Kabbalistic doctrine. He demonstrated the system at analyzing the names of Catherine de Medici, Henry III, and Henry IV of France, showing how, when the letters of their name were added up, the result could be read like an astrological chart. He went on to try the result on the names of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The king's prediction stated that he must beware of dying on the scaffold before his 39th year. Quote, "He's condemned to lose his head for being guilty of war." End quote. Marie Antoinette would be, quote, "unfortunate, unhappy in France, a queen without throne or money, wrinkled prematurely through grief, kept on a meager diet, imprisoned, beheaded." End quote. Cagliostro based his numerology upon the system of Cornelius Agrippa, which is based upon the Hebrew alphabet. In this, the numbers from 1 to 8 have the following letters associated with them, and I'll show you that. There are a couple of things I'll show. I think, yeah, we got a ways to go. We've got 10 more pages, but I'll show you this real quick. This is the 1 through 8 and the letters. There we go. Those are the Hebrew. Or, well, those aren't the Hebrew letters, obviously, but okay. The system for finding someone's number, no doubt the slang phrase comes from this, is to take the letters of his Christian name and surname and add them all together thus. So he does his own name. This is written by Colin Wilson, so he does Colin Wilson. Right there. Okay. These numbers add up to 44. The two digits 44 add up to 8. The number corresponding to my name is therefore 8. If the digits had added up to 48, then the second addition would have produced the number 12. In that case, a third addition must be made to produce 3, 1 plus 2. The signification given for the various numbers is as follows. 1. A number signifying directness, ambition, power. Its possessor is a pioneer, inventive personality, unlikely to have many friends or close associates, capable of kindness and generosity, but also of ruthlessness. The poet Yeats summarized the personality of number 1 in the lines, quote, "There is not a fool can call me friend, and I may dine at journey's end with Landor and with Donne." Donne, D-O-N-N-E, end quote. It will be found that the letters of William Butler Yeats add up to 1. In this case, the middle name is included because Yeats was known as W.B. Yeats, not as William. Oddly enough, if the letters of his most common nickname, Willie Yeats, are added up, they also come to 1. So, going back to the numerology, 2. This is the reverse of the previous number, signifying a well-balanced, gentle disposition. Richard Cavendish speaks of it as an evil and female number in the black arts. People with the number 2, which, by the way, in case anybody's ever interested, I'm, I'm pretty sure I have that book. People with the number 2 make good subordinates or helpers, but may be oversensitive, too easily depressed. Just as a negative aspect of number 1 is extreme self-assertion, refusal to admit one is in the wrong, what A.E. Van Gogh calls the right man, a man who will assert he is right in the teeth of all the evidence. So the negative aspect of number 2 is deviousness or vacillation. 3. The number of versatility and plenty, a traditionally lucky number. 3 times luck. 3 times lucky. People with the number 3 are gay, charming, not homosexual, gay, happy. Charming, adaptable, talented, lucky, but inclined to be other-directed, living too much for the approval and liking of other people. 4. This is the square number of the Pythagoreans, indicating endurance, firmness of purpose, calmness. In its negative aspect, it means dullness, square, in the modern slang sense. And he's writing this in 71, so square is, don't be a square. Since it is the number of the earth, it may also indicate powerful underground fires that sometimes break through in the form of earthquakes or volcanoes. 5. This is a number of magic, the pentacle. 5s are lovers of adventure. They are also lucky, but inclined to instability, erratic, full of nervous energy, inclined to be boastful, lovers of women, and often of alcohol. 6. This is a number of dependability and harmony. At their best, 6s are kindly, peace-loving, stable, and lovers of home and family. At their worst, they tend to be trivial, too obsessed with detail, fussy. Since 6 is divisible by both 2 and 3, it has affinities with the qualities of both these numbers. 7. Another magical number, the number of mystery and mysticism. 7s may be psychic. They are unusually introverted, more interested in an inner reality than in the external world. Aloof, self-controlled, dignified. In their negative aspect, they may be simply out of touch with reality, incompetent and vague. 8. This is an auspicious number, signifying drive and success. 8s have affinity with 4s and 2s. They are solid, 4 square, capable of long efforts and great concentration. In their negative aspect, they may amount only to stubbornness and persistence in the wrong course of action, in which case the positive characteristics become negative and success becomes failure. 9. This is the royal number, associated with a high degree of creativity. The 9 muses, the spiritual achievement. 9s are visionaries and poets at their best, wildly volatile at their worst, given to intense romanticism. Anyone who tries out this system will have some striking successes. I have pointed out that Yeats makes an ideal number 1. The letters of Bernard Shaw make a 9, and interestingly enough, Richard Cavendish adds that 9s are always falling in and out of love, and quotes Chiro to the effect that 9s often undergo many operations by the surgeon's knife. Both fit Shaw remarkably closely. However, it must be admitted that failures are likely to be frequent as the successes. Try to think of a typical 3, versatile, lucky, charming, a lover of people. Felix Mendelssohn seems to fit the bill precisely. I don't know who Felix Mendelssohn is, but the letters of his name add up to 4, the square. William Blake would surely be a 9, or at least a 7. Instead, this most visionary and introverted of men is a 5. The number of adventure and boastfulness which suits Casanova or Cagliostro more than Blake, but Casanova is an 8 and Cagliostro is a 1. This later cannot be coincidence, for the letters of Giuseppe Balsamo add up to 6. a number more suitable to Dickens's Mr. Brownlow or Wells's Mr. Polly. Oscar Wilde, who might also be expected to be a 3, is an 8, signifying drive and willpower. It is true that he achieved tremendous success and then tremendous failure, but this seems due to vacillation rather than unshakable purpose. A more modern system of numerology writes out the numbers from 1 to 9, then writes the alphabet under them thus. So here's a little bit different, and I'll actually flip back to the other one so you can see them kind of side by side-ish. So here's the new modern one. At least in 71, that was the modern one. And that does look right to me from what I know of it. And then going back, here is the one that they were using. Very different. Okay. Further information can be extracted from a name by adding up the sum of its vowels, which indicates the inner nature of the person concerned. Addition of the consonants gives the external personality the social facade. It goes without saying that there is more to numerology than this. For example, most numerologists also make use of astrology and vice versa. The two sciences are closely connected. Cagliostro's procedure must have been extremely complicated to draw such detailed answers from the oracle. One is tempted to dismiss the whole thing as just another apocryphal story about a magician, but there are well-authenticated stories of similar prophecies, which leave no doubt that such detailed prophecy is possible under propitious circumstances. Jacques Cazot, a royalist and author of the romance Le Diable Amoureux, prophesied the revolution in some detail in 1788 at a dinner given by the Duchess de Gramont. Cazot, an occultist, apparently had a burst of what can only be called inspiration, in which he was able to foretell the future of many people present. He told Condorcet that he would take poison to cheat the executioner, that Chamfort would cut his own veins but die months later, that the astronomer M. Bailey would die at the hands of the mob, and that the Duchess de Gramont would die on the scaffold, and that the only victim of the executioner who would be allowed a confessor would be the king himself. An atheist, Jean de la Harpe, was thoroughly skeptical and wrote the whole thing down. Cazot prophesied for him that he would become a Christian. He became a monk, in fact, and the prophecy was found among his papers after his death in 1803. A century later, the whole matter was subjected to close examination by Dr. Walter Bormann, who found abundant evidence for the prophecy in letters and journals of the period. Even the Baroness de Oberkirk mentions it in her memoirs, published in 1852. She describes an evening in which it was discussed in her salon, and a medium who had been brought there by the Marquis de Puysegur, the discoverer of hypnotism, was questioned about it. The medium went into even more detail about the fate of various people actually present, all of which was again proved accurate. Now, it is true that there is a great difference between numerology, with its fixed rules, and prophecy, which may be due to Dunn's serial time, quote-unquote serial time, or any other cause, but again, it must be pointed out that there are no exact sciences of prediction, whether by the stars, numbers, hands, or anything else. Everything depends upon the innate talent of the diviner. Cagliostro used numbers rather than consulting them. Before leaving Cagliostro, a word should be said about his healing powers. In a sense, an adventurer like Cagliostro or even Casanova is potentially the ideal thaumaturgist. The nature of illness is bound up with negation. Human beings have the power to close their senses and focus upon unimportant matters. For example, I can spend a morning poring over my checkbook stubs until my mind feels oddly dehydrated. The reason children experience so much of the glory and the freshness of a dream is that they have not yet acquired this power to narrow the mind. Since they have no great responsibilities, they have no need for it. But now we reach the point of crucial importance. This useful power to focus upon detail can easily create a flood of emotional negation. Anyone who has made the mistake of thinking about money worries in the middle of the night knows this. It is for the same reason that a man balanced on his toes is easily pushed over. The mind needs to have a kind of penumbral area that is aware of other times and other places to keep it healthy. Faculty X. Now, intelligent people can usually cure themselves of a tendency to negativity. Wordsworth's Intimations of Immortality ode offers a perfect example. By using the mind, by using his mind and his memory, he jerks himself out of his negative mood until the mind is wide open again. Narrowness is like a catarrh or a bad cold in the head. It produces a blocked up feeling. Wordsworth's timely utterance has that effect of clearing the sinuses. No one can breathe, so one can breathe freely again. Most illnesses bring with them a feeling of helplessness and depression that reinforces the illness, and not many people have Wordsworth's highly developed power of getting the mind out of reverse and into forward gear. The power of a breezy adventurer like Cagliostro stems from his positiveness. The winds of heaven blow through his mind because he is used to meeting adversity and triumphing. The very energy of his demeanor is a reminder of how good the world is, how much can be achieved by effort. He acts on his patients like the sound of the Easter bells on Faust, bringing the breath of far-off things. All that this makes it sound as if Cagliostro's chief asset was a good bedside manner, but it goes deeper than that. As the many descriptions of him make clear, he could radiate a compelling force that cannot be reduced to cheerful mannerisms. It was this force that was sapped by the Bastille experience. Instead of withdrawing to some quiet place where he could slowly recuperate until, like Wordsworth, he had restored his strength and optimism, he launched into controversy and litigation. All he had to do was sit tight for 2 more years, and he would have been again picked up by this tide of history and made into a revolutionary hero, as Cardinal Rohan, in fact, was. His downfall must be blamed upon unsound judgment. It was an unavoidable tragedy. If the stature of Cagliostro increases upon careful examination, the reverse is true of the other great magician of that period, the Count of Saint Germain. Kurt Seligman's chapter on him begins, quote, "Who was he and where did he come from? The riddle has never been solved. The dates of his birth and death are unknown. Incredible things are claimed of him. Frederick the Great called him the man who cannot die, and the Count himself asserted that he had lived 2,000 years. He would speak familiarly of a chat with the Queen of Sheba and of wonderful happenings at the marriage of Cana." End quote. Potentially, he sounds the most exciting magician of all, but Seligman seems to have been unaware of the researches of Gustav Berthold Volz in the 20s. These revealed that although Saint Germain was infinitely more sophisticated and cultured than Cagliostro, he was fundamentally little more than a fine actor. When the reports of contemporaries are examined, it does not even appear that he displayed more finesse than Cagliostro. He was a boastful self-advertiser. Casanova, who was easily impressed by genuine intellectuality, immediately spotted him for a charlatan and took pleasure in queering his pitch when they were both on diplomatic missions to The Hague. But he did not have to do a great deal. Saint Germain's own lack of tact quickly brought about his downfall, and he had to fly to England. Only one mystery remains, his origin, and it should be borne in mind that in those days it was not particularly difficult for that to remain a mystery. Communications were bad, and most registrations of births and deaths were confined to the parish records. The account that states that Saint Germain was the son of a tax collector of San Germano, and that he was born in 1710 is probably correct. Nothing whatever is known of his life before the 1740s, when he seems to have appeared in Vienna and became acquainted with various members of the aristocracy, among them Counts Zaber and Lobkowitz. He also met there the French Marshal de Belleisle, who brought him to France. By 1758, by which time he would be in his late 40s, he had become an established favorite of Louis XV and his mistress, Madame de Pompadour, for whom the famous diamond necklace was originally intended. Casanova, who met him at about this time, describes him as one of the most remarkable conversationalists he had ever met, and this is a considerable compliment from a man whose talents were impressive. He describes Saint Germain as a scholar, linguist, musician. He had an extremely pleasant singing voice, chemist, and is very good-looking, which Casanova himself was not, being swarthy and hook-nosed. He was a perfect ladies' man, flattering them and offering them a wash that would prevent wrinkles which he claimed to be expensive, but which he gave away. He probably came to the king's attention through Madame de Pompadour. Saint Germain's gimmick was that he claimed never to eat, but to live on some strange food or elixir that he compounded himself. He would sit through society dinners, keeping the table amused by his conversation, declining all food and drink. He would explain in a smiling way that he was a great deal older than he looked, but deny that he was, as some people claimed, 500 years old. Casanova says he would assert calmly that he was 300. Saint Germain's knowledge of history was considerable, so that he was able to report conversations of historical personages in such a way that it sounded almost as if he had been present himself. If asked whether he had been present, his answer would be an enigmatic smile. He developed mystification to a fine art. What were his real achievements? He was a fine linguist and seems to have discovered interesting processes for dyeing silk and leather, although altogether the evidence would seem to indicate that the love of his life was chemistry. Whenever he could persuade a rich patron to offer him food and lodgings, he immediately set up a laboratory. The mid-18th century was the pre-chemical age. Priestley, Cavendish, Lavoisier belonged to the latter years of the century, but then Saint Germain seems to have been fascinated by minerals and dyes rather than by the question of the composition of air or water. His chemical knowledge was genuine. His charm and culture were genuine. A theatrical streak made him want to astonish as well as please. Hence the hints about being present at Cana Cana. C-A-N-A, is that Cana? I don't know, sorry. And the affectation of eating only some magical food. The simple answer is probably that he was a vegetarian, a natural ascetic who disliked the guzzling and boozing that went on at the tables of the rich. In spite of his boastfulness, which made Count Warnstedt describe him as late as 1779 as the completest charlatan, fool, rattlepate, windbag, and swindler. His style was less exuberant than Cagliostro's, and he could give the impression of being quiet, modest, and well-balanced. As E.M. Butler remarks, his relations with his patrons often held elements of discipleship. That is, he aimed to interest the intellect as well as the sense of wonder in his patrons, and tended to assume the role of teacher. Strangely enough, he was a materialist who stated that his only interest was the good of mankind. Any man, even the most consistent, can appear to be many different persons in the eyes of different observers, and a man as mercurial and deliberately enigmatic as Saint Germain is bound to arouse wide differences of opinion. He forced his acquaintance on his last patron, Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. Hesse-Kassel? I don't know. Much against the prince's will, and yet ended by winning him over so completely that the prince was shattered by his death in 1784 and wrote, quote, "He was perhaps one of the greatest sages who ever lived," end quote. His known life seems to have been lived under the protection of a series of such patrons. After the diplomatic mission for Louis XV failed, he was supposed to put out feelers for a peace between France and England. Due to the intervention of the French foreign minister, the Duc de Choiseul, Choiseul, it's one of those French things I can't pronounce, who detested him. He fled to London, then later bought an estate in Holland, now calling himself Count Sermont. He came close to making a fortune by interesting people in high places in his various chemical processes, which included dyeing and, quote, the ennobling of metals, end quote. He was forced to vanish at a certain point, taking 100,000 gulden with him, but the factories he set up nevertheless seem to have prospered. He seems to have spent the next 10 years or so in Russia and again made friends in high places, including Count Alexei Orlov, one of the chief engineers of the Palace Revolution that placed Catherine the Great on the throne and the hero of the Battle of Chesme, 1770, in which the Russian fleet defeated the Turks. E.M. Butler believed that he probably aided the Russian war effort actively. He was made a Russian general, calling himself General Well Done. Back in Nuremberg in 1774, he impressed the Margrave of Brandenburg, Charles Alexander, and his standing was further improved when he was publicly embraced by Orlov. He told the Margrave that his real name was Prince Rakoczy, Rakoczy, and that he was the last of the line, preserving his incognito in order to avoid assassins. In 1775, the Margrave learned that the remaining 3 Rakoczys were dead, and that the retiring, studious guest at his castle at Triersdorf was really the adventurer who went under many aliases, one of which was Saint Germain. Taxed with this, Saint Germain had no alternative than to admit it, but asserted that he had never disgraced any of his many aliases, and that he had only adopted them to throw would-be assassins off the scent. He insisted that he was the last Rakoczy. The Margrave disbelieved him, and the aging Saint Germain resumed his travels in 1776. Frederick the Great ignored a letter asking for patronage, although there is some evidence that Saint Germain had worked for him as a secret diplomat, i.e. a spy, in France during the period of his involvement with the French royal family. It was this suspicion that made Choiseul his enemy. We're almost there. Yep. Okay. In Leipzig, the Grand Master of the Prussian Masonic lodges, Prince Frederick Augustus of Brunswick, subjected him to close scrutiny and concluded that he was not a Mason. Saint Germain claimed to be a Mason of the 4th grade, but said he had forgotten all of the secret signs. Fortunately, Saint Germain found his last patron, Charles of Hesse-Kassel, in 1779 and spent the last 5 years of his life peacefully under his protection. He owned to being 88 when he met the prince, although he was probably only in his late 60s. Lodging in a damp room gave him rheumatism, and he began to suffer fits of depression in his last years. After his death, at the age of about 74, many people refused to believe he was dead. Respectable witnesses claimed to have seen him over 30 years later, and another story asserted that he had declared that he would spend 85 years in the Himalayas before reappearing in Europe. Madame Blavatsky declared he was one of the hidden masters in Tibet. Perhaps the last word on him should be spoken by a not entirely hostile witness, the Prussian ambassador in Dresden, Count Alvensleben, in 1777. Quote, "He is a highly gifted man with a very alert mind, but completely without judgment. He has only gained his singular reputation by the lowest and basest flattery of which a man is capable, as well as by his outstanding eloquence, especially if one lets oneself be carried away by the fervor and enthusiasm with which he can express himself. Inordinate vanity is the mainspring driving his whole mechanism. He is stimulating and entertaining in society as long as he is only narrating, but as soon as he tries to develop his own ideas, his whole weakness shows itself, but woe to him who would contradict him." End quote. And so the legend of the man of mystery explodes with a hollow pop when examined closely. In the 20th century there would be no need for all this mystification and imposture. Saint Germain would become a brilliant industrial chemist, or perhaps turn his eloquence to some purpose on television. In the century that starved Mozart and nearly killed Bach and Handel with overwork, he had to fight to keep alive. It was a bad century for magicians. Okay, and that is the end of that chapter. So that takes us to chapter 6 of part 2, the 19th century, Magic and Romanticism. And it is it going to be one I have to break up again? I hope not, and hope to just get back to reading full chapters. But these are so long, I just can't do it. Okay, so the next one is 31 pages, so more than likely I'll be stopping in the middle of it. And then we get to the beast himself, which is going to be Crowley. It looks like we get a whole chapter on Aleister Crowley. So, all right, that'll be that for tonight. We will pick this up maybe Sunday, maybe not. I'm not sure. Depends on what's going on. Last few nicer weekends before winter hits, I may not be here to do the reading. So we'll see. That'll be it for tonight. See you next time.
Is broken one is because I have seen all apart. I have known about the play. I didn't have anything to say. Follow your heart, don't take. If you leave it behind, someone will bring. I left you my heart. What did you do? You left me all soft. Was my love true? Was it dark? You have no answer.